Hi, everybody. Today we are answering the question, what are levels of care for the elderly? If I hear this from somebody, what does this mean? Or if someone asks me, well, what level of care does your elderly parent or your spouse need? How do I know what I'm supposed to answer? I'm Pamela D Wilson. My website is pameladwilson.com. On there, helpful information for caregivers and aging adults. The term levels of care for the elderly is a term that people who work in the healthcare industry use a lot. When I talk to caregivers, I will say, well, how much care does your elderly parent need or your spouse need? What I'm trying to get at is, what can your parents do day to day and what do your parents need help with? And really, in the long term, what do you and your parents want to do about this? How do you want to manage this? When we think about levels of care, it's important to think about a plan of care for your elderly parent or an action plan for care and caregiving. And we can think about this in terms of ourselves, no matter how old we are, no matter what our age is, whether we are 25 or 95. How do we want to live our lives? Do we want to be healthy? Do we want to be active? Do we want to not have our health issues affect our daily abilities? When we talk about levels of care for the elderly, we could talk about activities of daily living. Things like bathing, dressing, eating, going to the bathroom, taking showers, the ability to get in and out of a car, to stand up from a chair, to get out of bed every day. And then things like making phone calls, setting doctor appointments, managing prescriptions, day-to-day activities. All of these things that those of us who are younger do without even thinking become more difficult when we're older. Now, if you're a caregiver, you may be only giving a few hours a week to the care of your parents, maybe 2 hours on a weekend or 4 hours on a weekend. On the other hand, if you are a very involved caregiver, providing a high level of care, things like help with bathing and dressing and maybe taking blood pressure, managing insulin, you're providing a higher level of care, which is a lot more time. If you're a caregiver, you know that you are stressed about time and stressed about being able to work and care for your family and time devoted to the care of your parents or a spouse or a child. Believe it or not, there are some parents who are in their 90s still responsible for children who are in their 70s. On the other hand, there are children in their 70s caring for parents in their 90s and children in their 20s caring for parents in their 50s. Caregivers come from all different life situations at all ages. It's very different for each caregiver. So when we look at levels of care and we talk about creating an action plan for ourselves and for parents, the idea is that as caregivers, we want our parents to remain as independent and able as possible. Now, we don't always think about that. Sometimes as a caregiver, what we think of is, well, I want to be as helpful as possible and do as much for my parents as possible, without realizing the downside of that. The more that you do for somebody, the less that they do for themselves. The more that you do for someone, you're teaching them that you'll do more and more and more. And this is exactly how caregivers become worn out, because we want to be helpful, but we don't think about the balance between helpfulness and doing too much and making others, like spouses and children or parents, more dependent on us. When we think about an action plan for parents, it should be an action plan that looks at all of the components that can cause problems and can affect their health. As a caregiver, you may not know what all of those components are. There's information on my website in my free library, these videos that I do. I have an online course that talks about care for the elderly. You can find a lot of help there, because things like exercise and nutrition and hydration, there are so many things that affect the levels of care that an older person will need. And I can help you create that action plan for your parents. But it's important to have conversations about time. As a caregiver, you do all these things. But your elderly parents, if they are retired, they're home all day. Can you imagine having all day, every day to yourself as a caregiver? Wouldn't that be pretty amazing? But many times when we look at retirement, retirement doesn't always turn out the way that we expect, mostly because of health issues that cause issues with how we feel every day and what we're able to do for ourselves. When we look at elderly parents and the time that they have, talking to them about routines and creating an action plan to help maintain their health and maintain their abilities is extremely important to minimize the time that you as a caregiver will have to spend. And yes, does it take effort? It absolutely does. Does it take motivation and a desire to be independent and be self-sufficient? It absolutely does. But the earlier that we start talking about these situations in our families, with parents, with our children, and about the fact that we all want to live a wonderful old life. We want to have great retirement years. But we can't always do that if we don't look at all of these things that affect health and well-being throughout our life. More information and help for all caregivers and aging adults is on my website, Pamela D Wilson. Please share this video and give some thought to creating an action plan for your elderly parents and yourself and how you might do that so that you can live as healthy and happy and as active a life as you want. I'm Pamela D Wilson. Thanks for being here with me for this video. I will see you again soon in another video.